The wind howled over the empty plains as dusk settled like a dying fire across Widow's Creek. The old wooden house at the edge of the valley stood lonely, worn by time and silence. Inside, a single candle flickered near the window, casting a trembling shadow of a woman who hadn't smiled in years. Her name was Clara Monroe, the widow everyone in town whispered about but never dared to visit. They said she'd buried her husband with her own hands right behind that house, and that sometimes at night she'd talk to the wind like it was him. But on that cold autumn evening, it wasn't the wind that came knocking on her door. It was a man, tall, scarred, and dangerous-looking, a cowboy who carried the storm in his eyes. His name was Jax Colt, a bounty hunter with a past darker than midnight. He'd come to Widow's Creek chasing a man who'd stolen something worth killing for. But what he found was a woman who told him something no one ever dared say to him before. "Please, don't come inside." Jack stood in the dim moonlight, his hat dripping with rain, his revolver heavy at his hip. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and gravelly, "I don't mean harm. I just need a place to wait out the storm." Clara's hand trembled on the latch, her heart beating like a trapped bird. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Nothing good survives under this roof." But Jax didn't listen. Men like him rarely did. When he stepped forward, lightning split the sky, and for a moment, she saw the ghost of her husband's face in the flash, pale, angry, warning her to keep the stranger out. She shut the door, breath quick and frightened, whispering a prayer to no one who was listening. Inside, Clara moved to the fire and fed it another piece of wood, trying to calm her shaking hands. She hadn't seen a man in years, not since her husband's death, and this one carried danger like a scent. But deep inside her, beneath the fear, was something else. Something that felt like curiosity. Who was he really? Why did his eyes, filled with sin and sorrow, make her heart ache like an old wound? Outside, Jack sat under the porch, watching the rain pour down. He could have ridden on, found another place to shelter, but something about that widow's voice and the way it cracked when she said please had chained him to that spot. He'd heard desperation before, but hers had layers, pain, guilt, and something close to longing. Hours passed. The rain didn't stop. When a gunshot suddenly echoed through the hills, Jax's instincts kicked in. He rose, hand on his revolver, eyes narrowing toward the darkness beyond the creek. "Who's there?" he barked. No answer came, just the hiss of rain and the creak of old trees. Clara opened the door slightly, fear flashing in her eyes. "They're coming," she whispered. "You have to leave." Jax frowned. "Who?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. "My husband's brothers. They think you're him, the man who killed him." Before he could speak, thunder cracked like cannon fire and bullets ripped through the night. Jack dove for cover, returning fire into the darkness. "Inside now!" he shouted. Clara froze, torn between fear of the danger outside and fear of the man demanding entry. Her heart screamed no, but her instincts screamed yes. When another bullet shattered the window, she finally gave in. "Come inside!" she cried. Jax burst through the door, slammed it shut behind him, and turned to her, chest heaving. "You said not to come in," he said. "I said it for your sake," she whispered. The two stood in silence, eyes locked, the air between them trembling with tension. The storm raged on, but something else stirred inside that old house. A different kind of storm, one born from pain, loss, and something dangerously close to desire. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "You don't understand," she said. "This place, it remembers death." Jax holstered his gun slowly, stepping closer. "So do I, ma'am." The words hung heavy in the air like confession and temptation woven together. She turned away, tears glinting in the firelight. For years she'd begged God to send peace. Instead, he'd sent her a cowboy with a haunted soul. Outside, the gunfire faded, replaced by the soft moan of the wind. Jax peered through the cracked shutters. "They're gone for now," he said. "But they'll be back." Clara nodded, gripping her shawl tight. "They always come back." She looked up at him, the man she should have feared, and felt something stir inside her heart for the first time in years. It terrified her more than bullets ever could. The night grew heavier, the air thick with secrets. Inside that lonely cabin, Clara Monroe and Jax Colt sat opposite each other, the fire casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Jax's arm was bleeding. A bullet had grazed him during the fight. Clara moved quietly to fetch a cloth, her hands shaking as she knelt beside him. When her fingers brushed his skin, he felt it, the tenderness he hadn't known in years hidden beneath her fear. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered again. "It's not safe." Jax winced but didn't pull away. "Neither's running," he muttered. "And I've been running my whole damn life." Clara tied the cloth around his arm, but her eyes were distant, haunted. "You don't understand, Mr. Colt. This house, it keeps its dead." Jax looked at her sharply. "You mean your husband?" She nodded slowly. "Buried right here, under the floorboards." The cowboy's breath caught. "You buried him in the house?" "I had no choice," she said, voice breaking. "The men outside, his brothers, they swore they'd take me too if I told anyone how he died." Jax leaned back, the creak of the old chair filling the silence. "And how did he die?" For a long moment Clara didn't answer. Then she lifted her eyes, filled with tears. "He tried to kill me," she said. "He was drunk, angry. Said I was the reason his crops failed, that I was cursed. He had the gun, but I pulled the trigger first." The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. "I buried him here so they wouldn't find out." But they knew. They always knew. Jax's eyes softened. "You did what you had to, ma'am." "Don't call me that," she said sharply. "I'm no saint, neither am I." Their eyes met, two broken souls bound by pain. The wind howled outside, but inside the storm was silent, heavy with unspoken feelings. Clara moved to the window. "You should go before they come back." Jax stood limping slightly, his hand hovering near his gun. "And leave you to face them alone?" "Not my way." The widow turned, her eyes fierce despite the fear. "If you stay, you'll die." He smiled, a rough, weary smile. "Wouldn't be the first time I've faced death for someone worth saving." Something in her broke then. The walls she'd built for years, the loneliness she'd buried with her husband. She took a step toward him, then another. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because," he said softly, "you looked at me like I was more than the man they say I am." Suddenly, the dogs outside started barking, and the crunch of boots echoed near the porch. Clara's eyes widened. "They're back." Jax moved fast, checking his revolver. "Then let's end this." She grabbed his arm. "No. If you fight, they'll burn this house to the ground." "Then we'll make them think the devil himself lives here," he said with a grin. Together they doused the lamps and waited in the dark. When the door burst open, Jax fired once, a warning shot that split the night. "Next one won't miss," he growled. The brothers shouted from the shadows, threatening, cursing, but when they heard the widow's voice, low, steady, fearless, they hesitated. "You want him?" she called out. "Come and take him, but you'll have to go through me." Silence. The men outside faltered, unsure. They'd heard tales of the widow who buried her husband. They knew she wasn't bluffing. After a long moment, their footsteps retreated into the rain. When it was over, Clara sank to her knees, trembling. Jax knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's done," he said. "For now." She looked up at him, eyes full of gratitude and something deeper. "You should go, Jax. There's no peace for men like you here." He smiled faintly. "Maybe peace isn't what I'm after." She blinked back tears. "Then what is?" He paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "You." The fire crackled between them again, warm and alive. Outside, the storm finally passed. In that moment, Clara realized that sometimes danger isn't what kills us. It's what makes us feel alive again. She reached out, touched his cheek, and said softly, "Then stay. Just don't come inside my heart unless you mean it." He laughed quietly, tipping his hat. "Too late, ma'am."